Hey, it's Rex Saldana with my buddy Mark Stevens, and we're back with another Eurythmics podcast. This is number 24. Hey, Mark,
Hello,
how's it
Rex.
going?
It's going well. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Um, this particular podcast, um, well, actually, Mark, I'll let you explain how we got the inspiration to do this podcast because of something recent that happened, and after that, we'll go right into it. But yeah,
Yeah, well, as everyone knows, Annie Lennox did a fantastic concert recently to as part of a group of people honoring Joni Mitchell, and Annie gave I think, just one of her best live performances and it was a cover of Both Sides Now, and that was just amazing. I mean, this comes on a few months after Annie and Dave being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and she recently did a performance for the Prince and Princess of Wales of "Here Comes the Rain Again," which was amazing, and now this. And it wasn't just Annie's performance of Both Sides Now, which I want to talk about just a little bit, but she joined the other performers, Brandy Carlisle, Cyndi Lauper, lots of other people, and eventually Joni Mitchell on stage as well. So she's been doing a lot lately in the sense of at least live performance. In that sense, we don't get a lot of that from Annie Lennox these days, and so it was great to have that.
right.
But Both Sides Now has long been a favorite song of mine. And when I heard that Annie was going to get to sing that as part of the Joni Mitchell special, I really was looking forward to it. I
Yeah,
thought, okay, this is going to, because I've wanted her to sing this for so long, and of course we know that she loves Joni Mitchell,
right.
and she recorded only one cover, Ladies of the Canyon, years ago, a Joni Mitchell cover. So I was really looking forward to this, and I have to say, she did not disappoint. I
No.
thought I thought her version of it was inspired. It was just amazing, and I thought for me, it was incredibly emotional.
Yeah, me too. And it really was inspired. I love the way she started at the piano, like kind of a normal Annie Lennox kind of performance. And then, she stands up and moves towards the audience and gets closer and then is singing to Joni. And then even at the end, she throws in a little bit of why, which she said in an interview that it was kind of spontaneous on her part and she wasn't sure how that was going to be received, but I thought it was great.
Yeah,
Um,
she ended that, and it was such a crescendo. I mean, she was, you know, um, there, and she says, "Do you know what I feel?" And she spreads her arms out to the audience, and so yeah, it was interesting to know that afterward that she said just what you were talking about. That she said, you know, well, I wasn't expecting to do that. It just came out. And that's the great thing about live performance. And that's always been the great thing about live performance from Annie
mhm,
is she's so in the moment, you know.
right.
And I think, and you can go and read comments, on YouTube of people who have posted this, you can read the comments and they talk about, that line from Why is in there at the very end. And people get it that there was this moment in time for Annie, who has always adored and really said, I think has basically said, there probably wouldn't have been Annie Lennox, the singer, had it not been for Joni Mitchell, the singer and songwriter, of course. So, it was a tie. It was this great moment where all of that came together, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah.
And loved
Well,
that.
and obviously, I think she was what she was saying with that was, Joni was my inspiration. Uh, Diva was her solo debut as a singular songwriter, and probably like there probably wasn't an Annie Lennox without a Joni Mitchell. There probably wasn't a Diva without a Court and Spark or Blue or whatever. So I think what she's doing is she's saying, she's my inspiration, and
Yeah, and that
that's what sort of
song,
started it all for me.
yeah, and that song, it's leading up to, the feelings of love and all the different things about that, and that That is so amazing
Yeah.
that she was able to, be so emotional with that at the end.
Yeah, yeah, it was a great performance. Anybody who hasn't seen it should definitely check it out. So it inspired our podcast today, which is we thought let's talk about some of our favorite one-off uh, Eurythmics or Annie Lennox performances, um, and performances that are not part of a tour, just one-off television appearances or things like that, charity appearances. So we've come up with a list of 10, five from each of us, and we're just going to run down, talk about them, and we'll be posting this on YouTube as well. So we'd love to see people's comments.
And I would say to say, I doubt these are not necessarily what we're saying are the 10 best live tracks
Right.
ever done by Dave and Annie or Rhythmics,
Just
whatever.
personal favorites.
Just some favorites, and when we said, hey, maybe we should do that, and I went back and I'm like, oh, well, here's one, and here's one, and here's one,
I know.
and I would take it out and like, okay, no, I'm not. We shouldn't. It would have been easy to take, for me, like Missionary Man from the Revival tour. I think, oh, that's one of my favorites.
Oh yeah, right.
I said, okay, so I'm gonna not do tours. It's
Mm-hmm.
just sort of one-off performances or special concert or something, and go from there. So
yeah. Although one would say, if these are our personal favorites, perhaps they are some of the best.
Yeah. Well,
anyways,
yes.
anyways, I'll start. I'll go first since Mark was kind enough to do the whole introduction about Joni Mitchell and how this all came to be.
That really long introduction. Sorry.
That was good. And again, anybody who hasn't seen that, go check it out on YouTube.
Gosh, yeah.
This is in no particular order from me. These are just my five favorites. So the first one I'm going to pick is Eurythmics performing "Would I Lie to You" on the A&E Live by Request special that came out in I think 2000, right around January, February 2000.
Yeah.
The reason why I like that performance so much is because it's the only time I've ever heard a live version of "Would I Lie to You" that sounds like the album, completely like the album. I'm not sure why, but I'm sure we've all noticed that in live versions of "Would I Lie to You," Dave's guitar isn't as loud or prominent in live versions as it is on the recorded version. You got da na na na, but live kind of more muted. Never understood that. But this performance on A&E was, that guitar came blaring out. And even at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame performance, the guitar, I think, was blaring more than it had been in previous live performances. But is that something you ever noticed, Mark? I mean, that guitar in the song being not as aggressive as it is on the album?
Well, I hadn't thought about it, but I know that performance you're talking about, and I'd gone back and actually I'd watched that a whole concert just a few weeks ago, and it is really good that version of "Would I Lie to You,"
And
and maybe
the horns and everything. I mean, it's complete. It sounds like, but they always did maybe truncated versions, or they would do they would bring in the Beatles song at the end, on the Revenge tour.
Well, it's interesting because that would have been recorded while they were on the Peace tour, the A&E special. And of course, they were doing sort of the medley with "What a Lie to You," "Ball and Chain," and "Sisters" on the tour. So this specific performance, they weren't doing that. And so they were performing a different version of "Would I Lie to You." So this is really interesting. Now, keep in mind too, on that same show, they did sort of the really rock version of "Sweet Dreams." You might say their version of Marilyn Manson's version of "Sweet Dreams" in a way. And so the reason I mention that is that's a very heavy guitar-driven piece that they did. So maybe that had something to do with how Dave was doing his guitar for this particular performance that you brought up.
I should clarify that I it's not that I don't like the live versions of "Would I Lie to You" where the guitar seems not as strong. It's just, it's just noticeable from the record to the live performance. But this one on A&E, it was the only time I've ever thought, wow, that sounds just like the album. And it's not, being live is not about sounding like the album. I understand that. I mean, being live is part about being alive is doing it differently, experimenting, changing it up. But it's also nice to hear sometimes the way it is when you hear it coming out of your stereo at home. You ever been to a concert where they sound just like the record, and you're like, wow, they they obviously didn't do much in the studios and from what they're doing on stage. It's just they just recorded it.
No, it's interesting. No, it's the thing with Eurythmics. They always did great things with the songs, changed them up quite a bit sometimes for stage, and but it's always nice to hear a totally different version, and this is one of them. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's go to your first pick.
Oh wow. Okay, for my first pick. Okay, well, do you remember there was a BBC performance that Dave and Annie did with Kid Jensen on the BBC, July 18th, 1982. Now, this particular show, 4 tracks, was rebroadcast just a few years ago. They picked out some of their favorites, and this was one of them, and I can certainly see why. Now, this show, I did some research, is very interesting because what they were having people do, that would have musicians come in and they would record this. They did a recording session. So it was partly studio, partly live, partly some people had sort of said, like, really well done demos almost. But what they performed here, I've Got an Angel, Love is a Stranger, which, by the way, had not been issued as a single. It was almost ready to come out as a single.
Oh, wow.
Then a very early version of Somebody Told Me, which some of us may have heard those early versions. So it's a totally different version of Somebody Told Me. And then 4/4 and Leather, which is interesting for that because it's probably as close to, quote, a studio version that you're going to get. But keep in mind, this show is recorded as they're recording these sessions. So it's partly live, it's partly, so it's a little hybrid of all of it. But I bring this up because of one of the 4 songs, which is the first song that they perform, which is I've Got an Angel. And I just am enthralled with this version of I've Got an Angel. They describe it as an unusual hybrid of synths, electronic drums, and wah-wah guitar with, of course, flute from Annie. So, but her vocals on this are just sublime. I think it's ethereal. I think it's almost primitive. It's evocative. Everything about it. It's so beautiful.
Yes.
And the other tracks too are incredible. And it's not completely an alternative version to what ended up on the album. It's a little bit longer, I think, but just her vocals are out of this world. Yeah. And when you think about what she's doing and the time period and this show, for example, I know they had been well known with the tourists, so they weren't people who weren't known. But, Eurythmics' first album had already been released, of course, and was not successful. But that they were still being able to get on shows like this and being able to perform, it had to be a testament that people knew what good musicians they were, even though they had not had this major success that was really only months away.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you can find this concert.
Imagine how hard they were trying at that time. I bet not trying to be good, but just trying, as they say, trying to knock down that door.
Yeah, and they were going all out, and you can tell in this in these 4 songs just how good. And you can find this on YouTube. There are a couple of people who have it up. There's a Mr. David who has it up. There is a YouTube called Fruitier Than Thou, no idea. And
Love it.
yes, and so you can find all these 4 tracks. So if you have not heard them and you're listening to this, I urge you to go listen because they are really incredible. And for me, it's a go-to. I'm going to call it live performance because I think it partly is. It's a go-to for me. It
Well,
makes my day.
I'm familiar with it. I will be honest and say probably haven't listened to it in a while, but I will tell you that my recollection of that set is that I've Got an Angel and 4 Another always stood out for me.
Yeah.
So this is going to spur me. I got to go back and listen to that I've Got an Angel version now again to refresh.
It starts out almost has like this little groove to it, almost like a 70s pop song. Just a brief moment. There's this little groove to it, and then it gets into that.
Maybe they started the wrong song. No, I'm just kidding. Maybe they were starting a tourist song. No.
It was just, I think they were getting it ready, but oh my God, it's so good. And I don't know if they performed other things that never got released or anything. I have no idea. I don't think so, but geez, it's so good. It's so good.
Yeah.
Now, what's your next pick?
All right. Well, my next pick is a performance that I was actually lucky enough to see in person. It was on the Tonight Show. I believe it was June or July 1995. I tried to get the exact date, but I couldn't find it. Anyways, she appeared on the Tonight Show promoting Medusa, and she sang A Whiter Shade of Pale in a very bizarre performance where she was dressed up in the Pagliacci suit, and everybody and all the backing band members had the bear costumes on, which it sounds great until she stands on the chair and everybody in the this Midwestern corn-fed audience that they're all visiting Hollywood and they're all expecting to see this singer Annie Lennox, and here's this woman singing quite a restrained version of Whiter Shade of Pale. By the way, vocally it's very restrained, and I'm sure it was done on purpose. She gets on the chair. It's very avant-garde, and it bewildered a lot of people in the audience because I remember we were talking as we were in line. We were talking to people who were all visiting from the Midwest, and well, who's the musical artist? Well, it's Annie Lennox, and they were like, these were middle-aged at the time. They were middle-aged Midwesterners, and Annie Lennox, and so they sort of had to be reminded, Sweet Dreams. Oh, then they knew who she was, right? So after the performance, we saw some of those same people again, and they just were so bewildered. They were just like they wanted to come up and say, "Hey, I just loved that. It was so great," but they were bewildered by it because it was kind of a bizarre. And that's what I loved about it. I mean, when she stood on the chair, I just was thrilled. I just thought it was great. I love anything that subverts expectations.
Well, I'm thinking too that what you're saying is that it's not necessarily like a live performance of a song that you put it in this top 10 kind of thing or this list of 10, but it's the performance itself. It's what happened. It's what she did with it.
Exactly. And bringing that up, I don't think either one of us, this is just a quick aside, picked the Grammy performance of Sweet Dreams where she's in dressed up as Earl. Neither one of us picked that, yet that is the perfect example of what you're just talking about right now. And frankly, I'm surprised I didn't think of that one. But yeah, back to what you were saying. Yes, it can be about what was done in that performance. And it may not be so much vocally. It could be what was done, what image was being projected. But that was a very bizarre performance, and I think it was very something you would see more on Top of the Pops than you would on American TV, because they take a lot of chances on Top of the Pops with costumes. Look at her with Walking on Broken Glass with that brown wig. She never would have done that over here. That was people would have been like, what? So that was a what moment, and I love what moments. Like Dave always used to say, what did people in the Midwest think when they heard Beethoven for the first time? I like things like that.
Well, yeah, and I think too, for what we're trying to do with this specific podcast, because there are so many songs that you could say, yeah, these are performances that were insanely good. But I think what we've both done is like try to find things that are a little different, a little out of the norm, and Not necessarily, it just depends. So we'll see as we go along, because actually sitting here, I'm thinking of two or three other songs.
Well, I
I'm going
know.
to change my mind by the end of this podcast on what my top five are.
I know. I'm suddenly thinking of other ones too that well, maybe this means we'll have to do a part two on this.
But
Anyhow,
would be terrible, wouldn't it? Okay.
so now what is your
That's
next
a good
choice?
pick, because and I remember it distinctly. And you kind of remember, like, wow, that was different. And, and no one does anything like Annie Lennox does. I mean, you just like, she does what she wants to do. I mean, my guess is the record company was like, oh, please don't do that.
You're going to perform in
don't.
a clown. You're going to perform in a Pagliacci sort of clown suit
Yeah.
on national television with this Whiter Shade of Pale, this
On
60s kind of psychedelic song.
on the Tonight Show, which was, at the probably time, the biggest thing you could be on for a musical performance here, or one of the biggest shows you could be on. Jay Leno, but hey,
Hey,
it was
just real quick, my personal theory about all the imagery behind Whiter Shade of Pale with the bears and the circus stuff and the Pagliacci. I'm wondering, she loved that song as a young girl. I wonder if she remembers her childhood bedroom as she would listen to the song. Maybe she had, things
stuffed animals.
things of that nature decorating her bedroom that just reminds her. Anyhow,
Uh-huh.
your next pick.
Okay, this is a total one-off performance from February 9th, 1986, the Colombian volcano concert, relief concert. It was been a disaster, and raising money to help. And so this quickly came together. It's at the Royal Albert Hall. And interestingly enough, this concert was partially helped organized by Choo Choo Marchand, who would eventually, in just a few months from them, be one of the band members of the Revenge Tour. I don't know if that's how she met him, if she already knew him. Anyway, but always found that interesting.
Yeah.
But what did Annie Lennox perform here? Well, she did two songs, but one solo performance. And I think this is the first Annie Lennox solo performance ever. And she is accompanied on the piano by Patrick Seymour, another eventual Revenge band member. She does Stevie Wonder's Blame It on the Sun. And this is one of my top Annie Lennox performances ever. I absolutely adore this. It's absolutely stunning. And I think I have said this on this podcast before. I forget where I say things, but when Annie Lennox had the website, and from time to time, she'd be on the website, she'd be asking questions. And I mentioned this song. She didn't remember doing it.
Oh,
she had no memory of it at all, which I replied, yes, and told her what it was. And, but which just shocks me to no end that she didn't remember performing. It's so beautiful.
Well, and considering, like you said, would have been her first. Although who knows if she was even thinking of it that way at the time, her first solo performance. But that it's Stevie Wonder, one of her idols as well. That But again, so much goes on when you're in, like Lawrence Stevens said, when you're in the zeitgeist.
Yeah. You're moving from one thing to the next. We internalize this so much differently than they do. And we do our personal lives. Again, somebody can ask me, well, what you did 20 years ago? I'm like, I haven't a clue what you're talking about. But I mean, this was such a great performance. And it's one of those things, it's kind of the flip side of both sides now, that I've always hoped that she would do a studio version of it, that she would do, kind of a proper cover. I'd love her to do a Stevie Wonder covers album or something like that. But it's just beautiful. Yeah. It's just the piano and Annie, and it's so emotional. It's such a beautiful song. I'd never heard the song before, but she did it. So it was.
I hadn't heard it either, and it's a beautiful song. And I did go listen to Stevie Wonder's version, after I heard her version, and yeah, I agree with you. It is one of her great performances out there. We should also mention the other song she did was
Give It Up.
Give It Up, with Chrissie Hynde, which is a Casey and the Sunshine Band song. Yeah. And can I just say, I don't think Casey and the Sunshine Band gets enough respect. They were pretty darn good, for a disco band. They are played very well, and they wrote great melodies. I don't know if Casey was the one who did all that stuff, but I always liked them, even back in their heyday. So to see Chrissie Hynde and Annie Lennox singing one of their songs, like, okay, if they can do it, they must be cool.
Yeah. Well, it was a great performance. So I mean, it could easily have made this one of
Well,
the
I don't
top.
want to take away from your pick, which
No. I was going to mention it, but it is, and then she gets out on stage with Chrissy and performs this great version of "Give It Up." So if you haven't seen these two, you can. I know you can find "Blame It on the Sun" on YouTube. I'm certain "Give It Up" is there as well.
yeah,
But by the way, this concert was released on video, and remember, this is 1986. This is still the early days of video albums. It came out in this hard kind of case,
yes, I remember that.
and it cost a fortune too. It was really very expensive, but I bought it, and it's a cherished thing.
$89.99. I remember that, available tomorrow, $89.99.
Oh yeah. These things were not cheap back in the day. If you were a fan and you wanted to get this stuff, you shelled out the money.
Yeah, you had to be basically probably a middle-aged adult who's somewhat comfortable to have indulged in all that when it first came out.
Well, I wasn't admitted.
No. I mean, if you were the type to buy those kind of movies all the time, like spend
all the time.
$100 on a movie every time it came out, and what, $5,000 on a VCR,
Yeah.
But those were the days. We do.
Those were the days. All right. What's your next pick?
Okay, so my next pick is the Eurythmics doing their medley on the 2005 American Music Awards. And they were promoting the Ultimate Collection at the time. Mm-hmm. And also, I think at that point they had just become eligible for induction in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I think, or maybe in 2004. So the release of Ultimate Collection, and that, I think, was meant to say, hey, nominate us, we're here we are, remember us. And it worked. It worked. The song "I Got a Life" was pretty big, actually. I mean, when you consider it got to 29 in the U.S., that's not bad, and did much better in Europe. But anyways, it's a great medley, and they perform under the big red star, and Dave and Annie have the black suits on with the white shirts and the ties, and it just was great. I remember watching it at some people's house that weren't all that familiar. They knew Annie Lennox, but weren't so familiar with Eurythmics. They were a baby boomer couple. No offense to any baby boomers out there listening who may be like, hey, I totally know who she is, but or who Eurythmics are, but they were just blown away by the, Dave with his guitar and Annie with those vocals and the Missionary Man and all that. It's a great hard rockin' performance, and I think he's the one who replaced Dick Clark. His name is escaping me right now.
Ryan Seacrest.
Right. He's the one who introduced them, and he talked about how he had their records when he was a young teenager and all that stuff. And I just thought it was great, So just a great. What I liked about it is sort of it said to people, look what they can do. This is Eurythmics,
Yeah, I mean, and they did that same performance at the UK Music Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
I think preceded it. I mean, they did the same lineup. Yeah. So 2 times they performed that sort of thing. And I always go back and forth on them. Like, I think Sweet Dreams was better at the Music Hall of Fame, that part. And then you
do the mix and match.
You do a mix and match. But the set there with the giant red star.
Yeah.
On the American Music Awards is so fantastic. I actually mentioned that to Lawrence Stevens once, and I said, "Did you know?"
That, yeah.
And he didn't know, and I actually sent him, like a picture of it, because what a testament to that the red star was such a well-known symbol for them.
And like you were saying earlier, this was a performance where the imagery came together really well. It was striking. And then, of course, those suits. I always thought they looked great in those black suits that they were doing for the Ultimate Collection. They just looked really good. And again, a great performance, great look, great clothes. It all just melds perfectly.
And we should mention they got a standing ovation for that too.
Yeah, which happens a lot with her and with Eurythmics. It does.
It does. Well, you've just seen something great. I mean, there's no doubt.
When we got back from the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, my partner was like, wow, she got the biggest standing ovation of the evening, I think, when she went to the podium. And I was like, all right, there we go. Okay,
Me?
your turn.
All right. All right. So let me just say, and I have said this before, this may be my favorite Eurythmics live performance of all time.
Okay.
And it's from May 27th, 1983, from the Old Gray Whistle Test. And it's live version of The Walk with a gospel choir, a grand piano, and it's insane. It is so good. They also perform on the show This City Never Sleeps,
Yes.
again with the gospel choir, which you sort of get on Sweet Dreams, the video album,
Right.
where they did that. I don't know if they recorded a version 2 to put on the video of The Walk, and it never got on it. In any event, this is so amazing. This performance. I mean, again, you can find this on YouTube. I encourage you to look it up.
I would have to say that's one of mine too. That now that I, it's like, oh, that should have been on my list. But
well, yeah, it's just amazing, and I
do you
love.
think it was probably all done at the same time when they were using like that gospel choir on the in that video we get on the album. Well, which I sort of could count as a video for that song, really.
Yeah, what my guess is that they had the musicians together, and they either performed on the Old Gray Whistle Test in that same time frame, or they may have been using the Old Gray Whistle Test almost as a test to see how it would work, and then they went on and recorded a piece for Sweet Dreams, the video album. So I had read years ago that they also performed Jennifer, and I asked another Eurythmics expert recently if he had ever heard that or had seen it or heard, and he had not.
Would that be Eric?
Yeah, it was Eric. Yeah.
Shout out to Eric.
Eric Gustin. And I don't. And he's a good expert on live material. Yeah. So that may not be true. They may never have done that. But I know I read that years and years and years ago, and I kept waiting for it. But if they did, we didn't. No one has it. But I just love this performance. I love watching Annie in it. She is. It's one of those performances where she's so into it. And what's the line? Backward, and she's flipping her head from just back and forth and back and forth, and that choir is just amazing, and that piano, it's a beautiful performance. And I think, again, what is so amazing about Eurythmics and Eurythmics Live, and in those early days, they took no prisoners. They were doing things that nobody else was doing. And I know, we love Eurythmics and all that kind of stuff, but I mean, you can't help but say very few groups at that time would have had an opportunity to be on national television and not simply performed whatever their big single was at the moment, or and sort of doing it exactly like the album. Let's not make any waves, let's not confuse anyone. Just imagine you have this platform, and you're performing 2 songs that are not singles, and you're performing with a choir, a gospel choir. And it's what I love about them. It's what I absolutely positively love about them, that you never knew what was going to come out, and it was always going to be something really extra special. And I can listen to it. And hey, I really wish I really liked about this, what has always drawn me back to it, is that it was so incredible that when you think about, they had this national television platform for this, and so many artists and so many record companies would have said, okay, just perform your latest single and probably the next single, and don't deviate too much. And that was the great thing about them. They were always taking chances. They were always thinking, quote, out of the box, the cliche, but out of the box or whatever, and doing things like this. And I don't think a lot of musicians would have taken that chance. and it's just an amazing performance. I can go to it anytime and listen to it.
Yes, I agree. And that reminds me of the Whiter Shade of Pale performance. You know, um, it it was a bizarre thing and it wasn't expected. And I could see the label saying, that's weird. And is it really going to make people run out and buy? I mean, like if you heard the album version of Whiter Shade of Pale and then you heard the version that she's saying live, I don't know that you would go out and buy it because it wasn't done in a way like, hey, this is so good and buy me. It was more like the artistry of it. And you might, if you liked it for that reason, for the artistry and for the performance, that's I think what was trying to get across there. But now I'm going back to this old thing. So sorry about that. Anyhow.
Well, I think that is what makes interesting, that makes Eurythmics and Annie Lennox performances interesting. That you may be watching that again. You said the audience may not have known who she was, not the whole audience, but some people in the audience. But you may be watching that and thinking that is, you may be looking at that differently from
Exactly. The way somebody else is looking.
Maybe an artistry kind of thing, or maybe a performance kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's what she's done.
Yeah, exactly. And by calculatedly not playing to sell records and maybe just make an artistic statement is very, very much like them and very much like her. And that's what I appreciate about those kind of things. I'm sure the record company would have been like, could you do a more standard version of that song? But
yeah. Well, I mean, with the old gray whistle test too, with these two gospel tinged performances, you really are sort of taking a risk, because you have this platform, and it would, in the pop music business, I think even now, even then, whenever, it's easy to confuse the public probably.
Right.
So would people like, well, what's that about? Is that because it's not like the synth wasn't in there, that kind of performance of what the original The Walk was, but they were having so much fun back then.
Yeah.
I mean, just whatever they were doing. I mean,
and I think it was about trying to show their creativity and their eclecticism and what they can do. We're not just this cold, icy electronic band. Look at what we can do here with gospel singers and pianos.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. The amount of warmth, that's coming out of that song, that deep.
Well, as chilly as any Eurythmics song might be, it's her voice that is what makes it ultimately warm and inviting.
Yeah,
even if it's a cold sentiment.
Yep.
All right, so my turn, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I like one of my favorites is her performance of Why on Saturday Night Live in 1992. This was before Diva came out, so I believe it was like March or April 92, because the album came out in May here. I do know we had a holiday that weekend, I think. So it might have been Easter or something. I don't know. Anyhow, to me, that performance is great. This is the first time we had ever heard the song. It was the first time anybody had seen her as a solo artist, or since the Eurythmics heyday. And the outfit, I think, is so Victor Victoria. I mean, she looks it's Julie Andrews and Victor Victoria. And of course, that's a whole play on, she's known for her androgyny. And considering that I'm sure the label probably wanted a softer image for Diva, which she did give them with the imagery and all that, it's interesting that she chose to come out in her first public performance for this album, at least in the United States, in this very androgynous look. I thought it was very feisty and, like, I'm not going to play by the rules, I'm sure Clive Davis probably would have preferred had she, looked a little more demure, but it's a great performance. And I remember being at somebody's house the next day and somebody made a comment, yeah, did you see Annie Lennox on Saturday Night Live last night? They were like, wow, you know, and that was my first clue that, oh, wow, this might be Diva might be a hit,
Yes, and we were all waiting up to watch that, because it was the first time we were going to hear from Annie on
Two
whatever
songs, two
yeah,
songs.
yes, whatever this Annie Lennox solo project was, and her hair is slicked back, it's brown,
Uh-huh,
it's
uh-huh.
slicked back, and it's embedded in my memory, her outfit. And
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't just it wasn't a whole tuxedo. It was the hard shelled uh, tux shirt. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
that's I don't even know if there's a term for that, but and I guess she did, and her sleeves were the French cut sleeves, but they were a little long.
Right, right.
And of course, the other song that she did perform was Legend in My Living Room," which a little bit back to the video that we would eventually see for
Right.
Legend. But "Why" was so amazing. Um,
Especially,
and
especially the end, with the spoken part at the end, which
"You Don't Know What I Feel."
I also remember another comment from an older man the next day who probably would not have been the type to be a big Annie Lennox fan, but his reaction was something like, "Did you see her last night?" Like, he didn't know what to think about that. It scared him a little, and that's what I love about it. I mean, here she is supposed to be. This is her solo debut, the softer Annie or whatever, but she comes out and she does this, and it's still a little off-putting and a little alienating to some people, and I just love that. I love anything that, like I said before, that subverts expectations.
Well,
But
it's
no, go ahead.
interesting looking back on that performance because of everything that you're talking about is spot on. Because the promotion, at least in the US, for Diva was a little more, I don't know if the right word is feminine, but let's
No.
just say that. But it was a more uh, toned down Annie Lennox. And I don't know if she purposely did that, but it was a different kind of look. But that initial US performance was anything but.
Right.
It was again very much the androgyny that she had made famous and somewhat discarded in a way
Right.
whenever
And
she
and
wanted to. I
somewhat
mean,
seems to
and I don't
disdain
think,
from time to time.
yeah, and I don't, I think when you really know what's going on and you followed them from 85 and 86 and 87 and 88 and on all these things, she was far more than the quote gender bender and the androgyny stuff. And by today's standard, it's so, most of it is not even extreme.
No, no, not
but
anymore. No. No. It's
but
funny to
that
think that she was considered controversial because nowadays
oh
that.
god, no, wouldn't be anything.
But
But
I have to make a comment about, we were saying we had never heard these songs before from Diva. We didn't know what we were so not hearing these songs that when I recorded the performance and I went to write on the label the names of the songs, it was "Why" and "Have Mercy." Because I
uh,
figured the song must be called "Have Mercy." I,
yeah,
instead it's called "Legend in My Living Room," one little brief excerpt from a stanza. And
yeah.
so, but to this day, I still have that label that says "Have Mercy," and I just think that's really funny.
I
That
will say
that's how much we had not heard anything.
these performances from Saturday Night Live are not easy to find too.
Mm.
You will not find on YouTube these
No,
performances.
they take them off. They take them off.
Yes, I think there is somewhere you can see Saturday Night Live's performance that night on the Saturday Night Live website or NBC or whatever it is. But I don't think you can even see Legend in My Living Room. I could be wrong, but they are not easy to find.
Yeah.
And another fan actually recently sent me a recording of it, and he sent and I was so thrilled. And I've got it somewhere, on
Yeah.
my myriad
Yeah.
VHS tapes that I don't even have a VCR to stick them in.
Yeah. Did you ever convert those to like DVD or anything?
I had converted some over time, but it's such a process.
I
And
know. And now we have to convert them to digital.
yeah, so yes, many times things have been converted, and then even those things, it's quite the tasks, and often I'm not in the mood to sit down in front of a bunch of videotapes,
I'd
and
probably hire somebody to do it.
that'd be good.
One more thing about this, and then we'll move on to your thing. Not a few days after that aired, I had stopped at a gas station to get gas and was paying inside, and lo and behold, Y was playing on the radio, and I, it was right then that I knew for sure, okay, this is doing something, because I saw the reaction the performance got from people, and now I'm hearing this on what was a very mainstream radio station being played there in the gas station. It wasn't a piped in thing, it was an actual local radio station. So that was my first clue. Okay, this is striking a nerve. People are, because here in the US, We 2 Are One didn't do much of anything. Savage, not much of anything. So we were starved here for a hit.
Yeah, that's true. But it was clear something big was about to happen.
And remember, Arista promoted it as the commitment is real. They if anybody has that Diva home video, that's a promo thing that they sent out. At the end of the whole thing, the commitment is real, written in the almost that Annie Lennox typograph that's on the Diva album cover.
Yeah, interesting.
So I remember somebody said to me at the time, "See, that they're really going to push this," which they did.
Which they did, absolutely. All right, me, right? Okay. Well, I'm going to pick one that interesting. You just mentioned We 2 Are One. So this is a We 2 Are One performance, but it's the Arsenio Hall show from 1989. A lot of people talk about this because it was just an amazing moment on late night television. They did perform, and it's sort of as a whole, but the band came out and Charlie Wilson was with them and Jonice, of course. And they did a great version of My Baby's Gonna Cry. Really, probably is one of the best live performances you saw live of it. It was, and Arsenio comes out after, and he's literally down on the floor. He's bowing down to them, and he's saying,
I remember that, yeah.
Charlie Wilson of the Gap Band and Eurythmics, and he's bowing down to them, and it's hilarious. But what's the best thing about this performance? And it's when Dave and Annie, on one side or the other, sitting with Arsenio Hall just in front of his audience, this giant audience, just them, not at the couch or anything where you usually talk to performers or guests rather. And he's sitting there with them, and Dave has his acoustic guitar, and he's asking them questions and all that sort of thing, and some pretty funny banter back and forth. But they do a acoustic version of Would I Lie to You, which was great. And and so Dave is sort of explaining to Arsenio, we can do any of our songs on an acoustic guitar. And Arsenio said, well, show me what you're talking about. And so he does Would I Lie to You, about 50 seconds, and Annie's up dancing and singing along, and Arsenio's just all into it. And then, of course, they do Sweet Dreams, which is just, I'm sure just knocked everybody's socks off, because here's this famous, synth song, and here they're doing it acoustically. And they're proving in front of everybody, hey, we'll go back to that. The commitment is real. We know what we're talking about. This before, but they close it. They say, well, what can we close it with? And the audience is yelling, "Thorn in My Side," and different things. And they do that really wonderful acoustic version. Again, it's like 60 seconds though of "Don't Ask Me Why," which is
they ended up doing the current single, right? Or wasn't it? Or
well, it had already been,
it was the biggest one from the album here. Yeah.
So
and that acoustic version is so that "Don't Ask Me Why" is just like, wow. Well, that whole performance, yeah.
So, and that's why I included it, because so many people talked about it for years. They talked about it. Remember that time that they were with Arsenio Hall and they were just sitting there doing acoustic versions? And again, you have to remember, the American audience had never seen them televised doing anything acoustically except maybe on a television.
Only if you'd gone to the Revenge show or saw the live Revenge album.
Yeah, but as a performance. So we didn't get a lot of these things, some of the things that we've talked about. We didn't have an old gray whistle test where they could have done. So this was particularly amazing to see it. And it's just one of those moments in pop history and pop culture that resonated with a lot of people, and not just Eurythmics fans. It was a defining moment for them, I think.
Yeah, I think it moved the marker for them, definitely, with the public. Yeah, that was a great performance. Oh, that the late '80s tour one. I remember it debuted at what, 18 on the MTV countdown here, went up to 11, and then next week fell completely off and was just gone. Don't ask me why, the song.
Well, I've always said, I've said this on another podcast, the tour didn't get here until, and they didn't start performing on American television.
Well, yeah, I was just going to bring that up. It seems like when you look back at their career in the '80s in the US, it's like, I don't know what happened with the management and all that, or the labels, but it didn't seem like they didn't get on TV and start playing until later in the career. I mean, where were they during Revenge and all that? I mean, I know they made some appearances, but it wasn't until Clive Davis, they hooked up with Clive Davis, that they suddenly got all this TV airtime and all that, which I think was very beneficial to, breaking, like you said, there were things that the American audience had not seen,
Well, I
the
think
videos and all that, but
the time sometimes didn't work out the best for them in the sense of what they could have done.
Yeah.
American television was so different.
I mean, why wasn't the Revenge Band on The Tonight Show doing Missionary Man back in 1986?
Well, they were touring here in the summer.
Yeah.
And I don't remember now. I don't know if, in the summertime is when you were getting repeats and stuff. It wasn't new television. Now, I don't know about the Tonight Show and stuff. I don't remember if they took a summer hiatus. I have no idea.
I don't think they
don't think so. But they were a little avant-garde. They weren't Bon Jovi or something that would have been easily, thrown on the Tonight Show or something like that. The Tonight Show at that time.
But the thing is, if you did put them on there, what a sensation it would make.
Yes, it would have. And I think this comes
as they do every time they perform.
I think it comes down to RCA didn't really know what to do with them. Now, let's say if Clive Davis, the Arista chief who got Annie and Dave to come over for We Two Are One, and think about all the performances they did for that. That's got to do with Clive Davis and Arista Records.
Right.
So I think what you've just brought up, and I hadn't ever thought about this necessarily, but I think what you just brought up has everything to do with the American record company. They did not know what to do with them.
Exactly.
They didn't know how to promote them. They were promoting other people. And I think that comes down to that.
Yeah. Well, and probably the reason why they switched, to, and the intent obviously was to keep going. It was heralded as a bold new beginning on all the stickers and all that. And I think if had the album been more successful in the US, I don't know that Eurythmics might have disbanded so quickly.
You may be right. I mean, it was a totally different kind of, everything would have changed. It was successful, but it wasn't, a massive thing. So anyway, it's an interesting performance. You can find it on YouTube. I suggest you go do it if you've never seen it. It's a hoot. I love it.
Wasn't Arsenio wearing like a polka dotted shirt? That seems to.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. That's how much that's ingrained, that performance. It really is one of the all-time greats.
Yeah. All right, your final pick.
Well, speaking of one of the all-time greats, how can we not talk about Annie Lennox's duet with Hozier at the 2015 Grammys, right? Yeah. Where he sang, they both sang his song "Take Me to Church" and then segued into her version of "I've Got a Spell on You," which was from her then new album Nostalgia. What a performance. I mean, she blew the audience away. She she stole the show. And of course, I think the big thing was when she was doing the wah, 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 she was mimicking a wah-wah pedal or mimicking a harmonica or a recorder. I don't know, but it was thrilling. It sent chills down your spine, and it was so like I don't want to say it was so classic rock, but there was something about it that just screamed, I know what I'm doing. I know about the blues. I know about soul music. I know about older baby boomers who like this kind of music. I think it was a very smart performance. I think it thrilled fans. I think it turned on older listeners who like that kind of genre. And of course, duetting with Hozier on his song was great exposure for him. He's back now, I see, with a new song. It's kind of funny that nothing much happened after that with him. You know, he put another album out after that, didn't do so well, but now he's got a new one out that I'm seeing is getting airplay. So I'm hoping that he has some more success because he's a good artist. And but about that performance, I mean, it just stunned everybody. I mean, she trended all over the place the next day. Everybody was talking. She's talking about how people coming up to her in public and saying how much they enjoyed the performance. And
another standing ovation. Taylor Swift
right.
jumped up from the front row and was,
Isn't it funny to watch the generations applaud her? Remember when Alanis Morissette jumped up at the 95 Grammys?
Yes.
I mean,
yes, it is interesting to watch those people because, at the moment, they're, the top person at the moment, or the big talk of the town kind of thing. She was on her feet, front row, right there. I mean, and everyone saw her. They camera went right.
And what's great about that is her fans will go and check out it. I mean, that's something I would have done if I was 17 years old and Annie would have been saying, "I love this singer." I would go out and check out. That's how I checked out Joni Mitchell. That's how I checked out Dusty Springfield. So people do that. If the person you admire loves something, you want to check it out too.
Well, and this performance, which was so good. And also, I will say, she did a lot of performances on television here of stuff from nostalgia, including I Put a Spell on You. This is by far her best performance of I Put a Spell on You that she did. And she did a lot of early morning television, which quite frankly, and I was at one of them in New York watching her, you're getting up at 6 a.m. or whatever ungodly hour to go and perform, and how anyone is able to sing that early is amazing to me. But this was by far, if you just cut out the rest of it, you just take the part about Put a Spell. She sounded great. She looked great. She was in the moment. And I want to mention real quick, that led to something else. A few days later, and this would have been a pick for me, but I ran out of 5. We limited ourselves to 5. But she was on a tribute to Stevie Wonder, where she did a live performance of Ma Cherie Amour. And that
was Eurythmics, yeah.
No, that was her.
Oh, I'm thinking of
Just Annie.
What was the song Eurythmics did at the tribute song when they reunited?
Oh, no, not the Beatles, but Stevie Wonder.
The Beatles, right. It was the Beatles. That's right.
Yeah, okay. Stevie Wonder. And I think she had not been slated to perform on that, if I understand this correctly. And
but they added
her. After she blew out the water at the Grammys, she ended up Ellen DeGeneres had her on her show.
Yep.
And she was able to do this tribute show for Stevie Wonder. And she did this. It's another one of my favorite performances, Ma Cherie Amour.
That is
and
good,
it's so good. And I don't think that would have happened. I know it wouldn't have. If I understand this right, it wouldn't have happened had that Grammy performance not.
It was a steamroll effect, yeah.
Yes, It was so incredible. That's just the amazing thing, that when people see her live, when people see Annie Lennox live, and we'll go back to the first of this podcast where we're talking about both sides now, and so many people have been talking about her. When people have an opportunity to see her live and what she can do and how she performs, it either reminds them of how good she is, it tells them again how good she is and they didn't realize it. When Annie gets up on stage, she knocks people's socks off. That's all there is to say about it.
Yeah, and that continues to happen. Hasn't diminished with age or anything like that.
I'm glad you picked that, because I think it's a pivotal moment in her later career. With and she was nominated for a Grammy She didn't win. Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett won,
Right.
but you know, I think that's important.
Yeah. And of course, that was her last studio album. We haven't had anything since Nostalgia. Performance, a very pivotal performance. That was her last studio album. We haven't had anything from her since. So I think we're all wondering if we will, and if so, when. So,
All right, are we down to my last pick? Is that
yes,
right?
that was my last pick. Yeah. So,
Okay. So I'm going to this, this is a one-off thing, and we've been heavy Annie Lennox tonight, more so in a way. Not maybe not necessarily, but we'll have to go back and see. But I'm going to pick her unplugged concert that she did. Again, that sort of preceded Diva coming out, and it's important for a few reasons. You get live versions of The Gift and Stay By Me, which is not, these never became staples in any of her solo concerts, which is interesting. And you got covers of River Deep, Mountain High, and my God, that was incredible.
I love that River
I
Deep.
remember that she starts before she performed it. She's sort of apologizing. Oh my gosh, how can I possibly do Tina Turner? My apologies to Tina.
Yeah.
And then of course she blows it out of the water,
Yeah.
like you. And then she did a cover of "Feel the Need," and then "Don't Let Me Down," which was again incredible. She did do a studio version of that I think was on "Walking on Broken Glass."
It's the B side of the CD single of yeah.
And I will
thrilled
say
to have
this,
that.
And I will say this: the studio version is really good, but I think it pales in comparison to the live.
It doesn't have the live version has so much more power.
So much more power.
It's almost a little more restrained on the studio version.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that she would be doing that cover, and it's not something that ended up a few years later on Medusa or anything, just a cover. But so it's a great, and it's the first time she was a solo artist, and she even talks about this in the concert. She opens with "It's All Right, Baby's Coming Back," which is fascinating, and she mentions in the concert that it was she was performing some Eurythmic songs, and it was quite clear to people that Dave and Annie had parted ways, and it wasn't necessarily a happy time between them sometimes. And so she said, I got Dave's permission. He gave me permission or something to that effect to perform Eurythmic songs. So she had felt the need to go ask him, which is interesting. These songs are as much hers as, and I think that talks a lot about their mutual respect, that she could have performed these. She didn't have to ask him. He doesn't have to ask her permission to do Eurythmic songs. Yeah. But I think that's something that's a mutual respect between the two of them.
Yeah, well,
do you mind if I do
that? Courtesy, yeah.
Yeah. So it was interesting. That performance was interesting here in the U.S. because we only got a 30-minute version of it.
Right.
The full hour on MTV Europe, I believe. And there's some versions out there that actually has Little Bird that doesn't have it on the other. So it's an interesting, there are lots of incarnations of it. But it was always very annoying to realize when we got a 30-minute version of it, and then you find out, wait a minute, Europe got, and England, everyone else.
Well, and MTV was showing hour-long versions of all these other artists in the U.S., but of course, let's give Annie Lennox the shaft and give her only 30 minutes.
That was the annoying thing. Everybody else got an hour.
Right. And I wonder if it was because it wasn't quite the same format. It wasn't filmed in that unplugged studio. It was done, at the Montreux Jazz Festival. So it was almost as if she said, I'll do an unplugged for you, but I'm kind of going to do it my way.
I'm going to do it my way. Yeah.
And maybe MTV said, okay, well, then we'll show it our way.
Yeah.
Who knows? But hey, let's talk briefly about the big disappointment U.S. fans encountered when that first aired. Do you remember?
Oh, no.
It was supposed to come on one night on MTV, and we were all right there waiting, and it didn't. It was preempted. Remember, something changed, and it didn't come on. And we were all right there waiting to record, and at 8:00 or whenever it came on, and MTV said something like, the Annie Lennox Unplugged will not be shown tonight. We're showing it and we were all, and it came on another night. But do you remember that? We were all right there.
I don't. I'm sure I was not a very.
It was so very disappointing. Yeah. Not only did they give us the shaft with a 30-minute show, but then they also did that to us at the beginning too, where we had to wait. We were all
Isn't
this
isn't
was right
that
after the big appearance on Freddie Mercury tribute, where she another performance that you know, let's just say it. That performance I think really helped propel Diva. That brought her back, and people were like, "Oh yeah, Annie Lennox," and wow, look at her, and she's with David Bowie, and
well,
so
it's interesting, it's almost like I didn't put it on my top five because I thought you were going to put it on yours. And so it's clearly a performance that, is a top live
oh
one
yeah,
performance.
definitely,
But again, sort of my idea was to talk maybe a little bit about things that
exactly,
necessarily that's a little bit different and why am I talking about them.
right.
But you can't not even you can't have a story about Annie Lennox that doesn't mention that performance
Mm-hmm.
and that,
Mm-hmm.
as David Bowie said, that dress.
I know. And it lives on. That performance lives on. It's 30 years later, and every time that is shown, that's always highlighted. Well, of course, the fact that it's a duet with David Bowie gets it a lot of attention as well,
But no,
especially now that he's passed on.
I don't remember that disappointment that it didn't get shown. But that tells you about the times we were living in. There was no internet, there was no social media, so that we all knew, hours ahead that it wasn't going to happen. You're sitting there in front of the TV. That's how you found out.
And I believe when it aired, it was like live on all time zones or something. Like it was 8 o'clock in America and California, but it was 11. And so I don't think like we had the because remember sometimes back in the day you could get a call from your friend on the other coast saying, "Hey, so it came on and this is what they did," and all that, and so you'd know ahead of time.
Yes.
I think like with that one, it was airing at the same time and so we were all disappointed at once. I could be wrong. Maybe some other fans remember that, but yeah, that was quite a.
Make a comment, but anyway, yeah, that I just thought that show should be mentioned simply because, songs that were performed that didn't get performed other times, that these cover versions. And again, she she was doing it how she wanted to do it, and this sort of new world for her,
Yeah.
this solo career, and what was she going to look like? She's in this long red dress. And
I
that
don't
kind
think she was a particular fan of MTV at that point. MTV had started to change and was becoming more lifestyle oriented with a lot of game shows and reality shows. And when she was at the Video Music Awards in '92, when she won for Why, they asked her about MTV. What do you? And she paused and she said, "What I like about MTV is the unplugged." So what she did was she brought up something positive about MTV, but I think on the whole, well, I think we were all a little irritated with MTV when they changed from being just about music and they went into this everything else. I mean, what MTV is today is nothing.
it's so bizarre that it even exists under that name,
Yeah,
because
and then they've chopped the logo in half as if to admit that we're half of what we once were.
wait, I never. It's one of those things that you mistakenly come across when you're clicking through, and it's not like I even click through channels anymore. It's just not how you watch television. But if
No.
you end up and you come across it, you just like, what? First of it, this thing still exists, and oh my goodness, this is what it shows.
Yeah. Yeah.
This,
It's funny you mentioned clicking channels. If I do that, my partner's like, "Why are you clicking channel? What?"
what are you, 1985? What's going on?
But what was particularly egregious about them preempting the performance was I think in its place they showed something about spring break. I could be wrong, but I remember it was something very irritating. Like, really, you preempted this for something like this?
Oh,
But
that
you
that
know,
that they, that
I know
probably
it.
that they showed it that they showed it at all eventually, even in the 30-minute version. We're probably lucky that we got it from MTV at the time.
Yeah, I know MTV used. I know it doesn't make money for them, but it was so pure when it was just like video radio, when there was just a VJ and music videos and some music news every now and then. That was so pure and so beautiful, even with a lot of the corporate sewage we had to watch.
Yeah, it's true. But anyway, this was this was just our idea to just that when Annie came out and did that great performance for the Joni Mitchell thing, we said, well, we were sort of talking like we do, well, what were some of the other things that just kind of blew us out of the water that you kind of weren't expecting, but I guess this too, until it was just a few weeks before it happened that we even knew she was even doing this, or that this was even happening. So Annie keeps a lot of things to herself, and then she'll tell us, okay, this is going to happen. But she's not, we don't know what's happening sometimes. So, hey, who knows? She may be working on another solo album. We just don't know about it yet. Let's all dream about it.
I would say if she's doing a solo album, it's probably a covers album,
Well, who knows? Or maybe, who knows? We'll
Although
hope.
she said she didn't have the grist to write, but maybe the pandemic gave her some. Anyways, I'm happy with a covers album or original album.
I'm happy with.
I'm even going to say that I'm happy if she chooses to never do anything again, because that's her right.
It's her right, and I think. So and that was for what, the Gershwin Prize? Is that what it was? Gershwin Prize, the library.
That's in her future. Trust me.
Yeah, I think we should say that. I think she's going to be a recipient of that.
That was the whole point of showing about their songs being in there and all that.
Yeah, I think she, again. Oh, and I believe the person who produced that show, I'm forgetting his name, but he's the guy that produces
Ken Ehrlich. Ken Ehrlich.
Yeah, that produces the Grammys.
Mm-hmm.
And he had an interview with somebody that I read that every one of the singers wanted to do both sides now. Everyone had said so.
Well,
and then Annie had said something to him that I've kind of worked out how I would do it. And as soon as he heard what she would do with it, he said, "Okay, it's hers."
Well, when I heard she was doing both sides now, I thought, well, they gave her the biggest song to do, other than maybe Big Yellow Taxi, which was the the sing along at the end. So
and then she had the first line in that one too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was great to see you and talk to you again.
Yeah. So I hope if you're listening to this on YouTube, put some comments and let us know what you think about our picks for these performances, and let us know what some of your picks are too.
Yeah, I would really like to hear that, and maybe it's one that will remind me that I would say, oh yeah, I should have included that. Right. But yeah, I would like, and if any of these are new to you, let us know what you think. If you can find them on YouTube, most of them you'll be able to find. I think the Hozier and Annie Lennox duet, there's a way to find it.
Yeah,
it's not on YouTube.
I saw it on YouTube today, but it's in a weird kind of like. It's not full screen. It's like in a box, and that's a hard one to get. They keep pulling. Anybody who puts it up, it gets pulled, and if you didn't record it personally, you're probably out of luck.
Why it's not on the Grammy website that you can look it up is beyond me. But we don't control these things. I'm sure
why the Grammy Museum in LA has not had the House of Me exhibit there is another question, but we won't go into that.
House of Annie Lennox. Yeah,
the House of Annie Lennox. Yeah, I mean that seems tailor made.
Yeah. Oh, well, and now the Hall of Fame should have it.
Right.
Anyway,
all right, Mark.
If we ran the world, this is how we would do it. You say.
Right. Well, if we ran the world, we would ask Annie Lennox. She would tell us, and then we would do it. Yeah, I mean, for things regarding her.
All right. Well,
my God, if she ever listened to us, she would probably think, "What is with these guys?" All right. All right. Take care, everybody. Nice to see you, Mark.
You too, Rex.
All right, bye.